paranoid CEO couldn't stop loving the maid and forgave a father's sin. The paranoid billionaire CEO couldn't stop loving the maid, then found a letter that changed everything. He had cameras in every hallway, but no one ever saw his heart. He trusted no one, loved no one, until the maid he hired to clean his mansion left a letter on his desk. A letter that carried the name of the man who destroyed his family, her father. Yet, somehow, he still couldn't let her go. The maid, the mansion, and the billionaire's broken heart. The first time Ethan Sinclair saw her, she was scrubbing the marble floor of his penthouse hallway with the quiet intensity of someone trying to erase more than just dirt. It was raining outside, relentlessly so. Thunder cracked against the glass like a warning. The skyline of New York blurred behind the storm, as if the whole world were crying with him. But Ethan didn't cry. He hadn't in 23 years. Not since the night everything he loved was stolen. He walked past her, his leather shoes silent against the imported stone, and yet she flinched, like she felt him, not just heard him. She didn't look up. That struck him. Most people did. They looked, they stared. Some smiled too wide, others held their breath. Billionaire, CEO, tech genius, the kind of man they studied in magazines or followed on late-night gossip shows. Cold, brilliant, unreachable. But she didn't look up, and that intrigued him more than it should have. Her name was Clara James, and the agency said she was temporary staff, cleaning nights while her mother recovered from surgery. College dropout, no red flags, no drama, no danger. That's what the files said. But Ethan had learned the hard way that files lied. People did too. So he watched her, quietly, from cameras, from shadows, from behind tinted glass in the library while she hummed a lullaby to no one and dusted shelves he hadn't touched in years. And slowly, something dangerous began to form in him. Trust. He hadn't trusted anyone since his father's funeral. Since the day his mother lost the family fortune trying to chase back a betrayal. Since the man named Walter James, Clara's father, bamboozled $18 million, 0 cents from Sinclair Holdings, and vanished without a trace. That last name, James, wasn't common enough to ignore, not in his world. So he checked, and checked again. Same man, same bloodline. And yet, she didn't know. She couldn't. The way she looked at his old Steinway in the sitting room, the way her hands shook when she cleaned the photo of his mother on the mantel, Clara wasn't pretending. She was hurting. That made it worse. Because Ethan didn't just want revenge anymore. He wanted answers. He wanted her. It started with silence. It always did. She never asked questions, never lingered, but she returned a forgotten book to the shelf he couldn't reach after his car accident left him with a limp. She placed fresh flowers in the hallway where his sister once painted as a child. She treated his mansion like a home, like it mattered. And then, one night, it happened. He walked in on her playing the old piano. She froze. "I'm sorry," she gasped, standing so fast the stool clattered to the floor. "It was unlocked. I thought no one was home." He said nothing, just stared at her. Those hands, callous and nervous, had played with such grace, like they'd grown up with the keys, like they belonged here more than he did. "Why were you playing?" he asked quietly. She blinked, unsure if it was a trap. "Chopin, Nocturne in E-flat major." "You learned that where?" "My mom taught me, before things got bad." "Before what got bad?" She hesitated, bit her lip. "My dad, he left, took everything with him." Ethan's breath caught. So she did know, but not what he did, not the real story. He wanted to scream, to throw every headline, every lawsuit in her face. But instead he just nodded, cold, calm, CEO mask locked in place. "You play well," he said. She looked down. "Not well enough," and walked away. That night, he didn't sleep. Instead, he pulled out the letter. The one his mother wrote on her deathbed. The one that said, "Forgive if you can, or the past will chain your future." He thought forgiveness was weakness, But Clara James made him question everything. The next morning, she was gone. No warning, no explanation. Just an envelope on his desk. Inside was a folded piece of stationery, the kind that smelled like lavender and grief. Mr. Sinclair, I didn't know until last night. I found an old clipping in your study while dusting. My father's face, the headline, the dates. I never believed he could be a criminal, but now I understand why. The way you looked at me changed. I'm sorry I brought his shadow into your home, into your heart. I never meant to deceive you. I just wanted to be useful, even if just for a little while. Clara. He read it twice. Then again. By the fourth time, the words blurred. Not from the storm outside, but from the storm inside him. She left before he could tell her. She was the first person in 20 years who made the mansion feel less like a mausoleum and more like a memory worth keeping. And just like that, Ethan Sinclair realized something terrifying. He had finally fallen for someone, and she had walked out the door without even knowing. She was the only one who could break the curse. Session 1. The Trail of Lavender and Lies. The sky over Manhattan was the color of regret, gray, heavy, endless. Ethan Sinclair stood at the top of his glass tower, the city stretching beneath him like a kingdom he no longer cared to rule. His reflection stared back at him in the window, sharp-jawed, silver-haired, with eyes that looked 30 and soul that felt 70. In his hand, he clutched Clara's letter like it was the last fragile string holding together a past he never wanted to face. And she was gone. But the scent of lavender still lingered. On the piano keys. On the sheets of the guest room she never officially stayed in. On the air itself, like her presence had seeped into the walls. And it wasn't just the scent, it was the silence she left behind. The kind that screamed. For a week, Ethan tried to forget. He buried himself in board meetings, pushed out a $400 million 0-cents acquisition without blinking, smiled for cameras at a charity gala he forgot he even sponsored. But behind every calculated move, his mind wandered. Was she safe? Did she blame herself? Did she even know the truth? His truth? Because as much as Clara believed she carried her father's sin, she didn't know what Ethan had done. He hadn't just fired Walter James all those years ago. He'd destroyed him. With purpose. With precision. Because back then, Ethan believed that anyone who betrayed the Sinclair name deserved to be buried beneath it. Now he wasn't so sure. Because Clara didn't resemble a conman's daughter. She resembled the kind of woman who left flowers without expecting thanks. And he'd let her walk away. Until the day Ethan found something she left behind. The lavender envelope. Tucked behind the piano sheet stand, half folded like it had slipped from her journal. He hesitated before opening it. Her handwriting curved softly across the paper. Someday I'll play for someone who listens, not just hears. Someday I'll live in a house that doesn't feel borrowed. Maybe someone will look at me and not see him. He sat down, on the same piano bench, closed his eyes. And for the first time in 23 years, he wept. The next morning, Ethan gave his driver a name and a single instruction. Find Clara James. Don't let her know it's me. 3 days later, she was found in Brooklyn, working the night shift at a nursing home under her mother's maiden name, sleeping on a friend's couch, delivering groceries during the day, taking online classes at night when Wi-Fi allowed. No drama, no vices, just survival. The realization hit Ethan like a gut punch. That she'd never been hiding from him. That she was hiding from herself. Still, he hesitated. What right did he have to barge into her life now? To reveal his name, his motives, his sins? So instead, he made a choice. He went undercover. Not as a CEO, as someone broken. Because for once in his life, he didn't want to be seen as a billionaire or a boss. He wanted to be seen as a man. Day 1. He showed up at the nursing home in a faded hoodie and worn jeans, claiming to be a new volunteer. The director, starstruck at first glance, nodded quickly. "Don't let the residents wander off again," she muttered, distracted by a ringing phone. Ethan smiled politely. Inside, his heart was pounding. Because there, on the far side of the rec room, was Clara, and her hair tied back in a messy braid, her posture tired but graceful, eating Pride and Prejudice aloud to a woman in a wheelchair who was clutching a stuffed cat, and laughing. God, her laugh. It was the sound that had been missing from his marble halls. Was done. Jordan blinked away, and she noticed him. "You're new," she said casually, adjusting a vase on a windowsill. Ethan forced a shrug. "Just helping out while I figure things out." She nodded, eyes scanning him for more. But he kept his mask in place. "Name's David," he said, the alias sliding out of habit. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Clara." He already knew. Week 1. They played chess on breaks. He lost on purpose, until she caught on. "You're not that bad," she teased. He smirked. "Or maybe you're just that good." Their laughter danced between them like an old song neither remembered but both felt. And still, he said nothing. Because every time she laughed, he felt guilt sink deeper into his chest. One night, after walking her to the subway, she asked quietly, "Why do you always wear long sleeves?" Ethan paused. The truth? To hide the scar from his accident, the one that reminded him how fragile power really was. Instead, he said, "Some things look better hidden." She stared at him, unblinking. "While everything needs to be hidden, David." And that, right there, was the aha moment the lie began to crack. Week 2. Clara opened up. Her mother's health had stabilized. She was taking community college classes online, nursing. Still dreamed of music. But dreams don't pay rent, she'd said. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to fix it all. But every time he reached for his phone to wire money, she didn't need saving. She needed believing. And that terrified him more than bankruptcy ever had. Then, one day, fate intervened. An elderly man collapsed in the hallway. No staff nearby, just Ethan and Clara. She dropped to her knees, assessing pulse, breathing, snapped into action like a trained medic. "I'll call 911, she barked. Ethan did, but couldn't take his eyes off her. This wasn't the girl from the agency cleaning his floors. This was a woman of purpose, of fire, of grace. And as the paramedics arrived and the crisis faded, Clara sank into a chair, trembling. Ethan knelt beside her. "You were incredible," he whispered. She looked at him, eyes glassy. "I was so scared." He reached for her hand, hesitated, but she took it anyway. And for the first time, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. That night, he stood outside her apartment building, torn between telling her everything and disappearing forever. But before he could decide, a voice behind him spoke. "Ethan Sinclair?" He turned. An old man, a cane, sharp eyes. "You're a hard man to track down without security." Ethan stiffened. "Do I know you?" The man nodded slowly. "I knew your father, and Walter James." Ethan's blood ran cold. The man pulled something from his coat. A photo. Faded, torn. Clara, at 5 years old. On her father's lap. And in the background, his mother. "There's more to that story than you think," the man said softly. "And you've just walked into a truth neither of you are ready for. Session 2. The photo, the fire, and the forgotten truth." It had been 24 hours since Ethan held that photograph. And yet the weight of it hadn't left his chest. Clara, 5 years old, cradled in Walter James's arms, her cheeks dusted with birthday cake, eyes wide with innocent joy. But what haunted Ethan wasn't the little girl. It was the blurry woman in the background, his mother, Margaret Sinclair. The woman who once controlled every breath in the Sinclair legacy. The woman who'd sworn Walter James was a liar and a thief. The woman who had driven him out with iron resolve. So why was she in that photo? Why was she smiling? Ethan returned to his penthouse that night, the illusion of peace shattered. He stood in his late mother's library, where every photograph was perfectly arranged, catalogued, curated for legacy. But that photo, the one the old man handed him, wasn't here. Not in any Sinclair album. Not in any press release. Hidden, buried, forgotten. He placed the old snapshot on the grand piano and noticed something he hadn't before. A single candle in the background of the image, shaped like a lavender stem, flickering beside a framed quote. Truths are best carried in silence, until silence kills them. That wasn't a child's birthday photo. It was a confession. The next morning, Ethan made a call to a woman he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Miriam Easton, his mother's personal assistant, a keeper of the Sinclair secrets. Her voice was crisp as ever. "Mr. Sinclair, you sound like a man who's finally ready to hear the truth." He clenched the edge of his desk. "How long have you known?" And she paused, long enough to bury it. They met in an art gallery in Soho, neutral ground. Miriam, now silver-haired and sharp as a scalpel, handed Ethan a sealed folder and a single sentence. "Walter James didn't steal anything. Your mother did." Inside the folder were ledgers, letters, and the original contract. The patent, not for money, for a music therapy technology pioneered by Walter and funded through early Sinclair grants. It was supposed to go to veterans with PTSD. Affordable, accessible. But 1 week before release, Margaret pulled out. Not because it wasn't viable, because it wouldn't be profitable. She took the patent, rebranded it under Sinclair Health Tech, tripled the price, erased Walter's name. When Walter threatened to go public, she leaked documents branding him unstable, claimed he forged signatures, froze his account, and when Ethan, in his mid-20s and desperate to prove himself, took over, he carried out her punishment without blinking, to not knowing the truth. Olivia asked, voice cracking. Miriam looked away. "She was there, the day it happened. She saw your mother slap Walter. She heard the threat. You ever try to drag my name through the mud, I'll bury you so deep, your daughter will forget your face." Nearly dropped the folder. Everything inside him rebelled. But somewhere beneath the fury, a deeper ache opened. Clara had grown up believing her father was a thief. He had grown up believing his mother was justice. Both were wrong, and both had paid. Back in Brooklyn, Clara didn't sleep that night. Not because of the nursing home or the sirens outside her window, but because of the man named David. Something didn't add up. His hands, too precise for a construction worker. His knowledge, too deep for someone figuring things out. His eyes haunted, but not lost. He asked too few questions, listened too carefully. And tonight, when she mentioned her father's name in passing, David had flinched. Clara pulled the dusty box from the closet. Letters from her childhood, scraps her mother couldn't bring herself to throw away. And there it was. Torn photo. The same one Ethan had. But hers had one more corner intact. In that fragment, a gold cufflink glinted near the piano, with a tiny Sinclair family crest. He froze. Because Walter James never wore Sinclair jewelry. But Ethan Sinclair did. And suddenly, the pieces fell into place. The next day at the nursing home, Clara didn't smile. She watched Ethan, David, from across the room. He handed a cup of tea to Mrs. Randall with that same practiced gentleness, but something had changed in his posture. His shoulders carried weight now, His hands trembled when he thought no one noticed. She waited until lunch break, then cornered him in the courtyard. "You ever play chess with someone who already knows how the game ends?" she asked quietly. Ethan stiffened. "Depends on the player." She walked closer, her voice like cut glass. "Father wore Goodwill sweaters, never gold cufflinks." He said nothing. "And no volunteer from Queens knows how to quote Satie in French." Still silence. Finally, she pulled the torn photo from her jacket. "Tell me the truth, Ethan." And for the first time, he did. He told her everything. About the letter, the search, the disguise, about the photograph that changed everything, about the lie he lived, and the truth he buried. The Clara didn't interrupt. She stood there, arms crossed, jaw tight, but tears welling in her eyes. When he finished, she whispered, "I should told me the truth the first day. I might have hated you. But no. Now I just pity you." And she walked away. That night, Ethan sat alone in his penthouse again. The city outside buzzed with parties and power. But inside, nothing but echoes. He thought of her final words. And then of Walter James, a man he never really knew, a man he wronged because it was easier than questioning the woman who raised him. The lavender candle burned low beside the piano. And with a shaking hand, Ethan opened his laptop. He was going to make it right. Even if it cost him everything. Session 3. The lawsuit, the letter, and the lavender candle. The lavender candle had nearly burned to the bottom when Ethan made the call. Not to a lawyer. Not to the board. Not to his godfather, Judge Harold Grant. A man of law, a man of principles. A man who once whispered to him at his mother's funeral. Margaret Sinclair built empires, but some of it was smoke. That night, Ethan asked the question he should have asked 10 years ago. "Horrible, if I gave you documents proving Sinclair Corp stole a patent, hid the truth, and ruined an innocent man, could we undo it?" The line was silent. Then came the answer. "But we can unbury it." The next morning, Ethan submitted the first of many documents. An internal audit. The personal confession. A formal apology drafted to the James family and their legal team, if Clara even had one. He called it Restoration Protocol. The board called it insanity. "We're worth $7,300,000,000, 0 cents, Ethan," barked Dominic Voss, his COO. "You want to voluntarily hand over legacy assets to a woman with a flower shop and a box of—" "She has the truth," Ethan said calmly. "She has emotions. We have lawyers." "No, Ethan," corrected Will. "We have skeletons, and if she opens that closet, half this city burns." Meanwhile in Brooklyn, Clara lit a lavender candle of her own. Not for peace, for clarity. She had Ethan's confession, but not his motives. And the photo? The one that now sat on her windowsill? It still whispered a question she couldn't ignore. Why did your mother lie? Why did my father stay silent? And why now? Why, after all these years, did Ethan suddenly care? She turned to her old typewriter, the one her father gave her when she was 12. With its chipped keys and uneven ink, it still worked better than any fancy MacBook. She typed 3 words on a fresh page. "I forgive nothing." Then underneath, "But I will listen." By that afternoon, a lawsuit had been filed. Not by Clara, but by the estate of Walter James, through a pro bono legal nonprofit that had, quietly, followed his story for years. Turns out Walter hadn't vanished entirely. Until now. It began simply. "The man who once called me a thief, one day you'll find this. When you do, I hope you ask not for forgiveness, but for understanding." The letter was emotional, broken in places, but one line echoed louder than the rest. "I didn't fight back. Not because I was guilty. but because I was tired. And because I didn't want my daughter to grow up in courtrooms. Clara held that page to her chest and wept for the third time in 20 years. Not because of what was lost, but because even in disgrace, her father still protected her. Ethan read the letter 5 times. Then he made his choice. The next morning, he called a press conference. Not to spin, not to deflect, but to confess. Live. The room was packed with reporters and half of Wall Street. Ethan Sinclair stood behind a dark oak podium in a tailored suit that looked more like armor than fabric. He cleared his throat. And then he told them everything. About the patent, the theft, the lavender candle, his mother, the photo, Clara. And then the sentence that stunned the room into silence. Uncle's fortune was built in part on a lie, and I'm not here to protect it. I'm here to dismantle the parts of Sinclair Corp that were born in shadow and rebuild what can be saved in light. A woman in the front row dropped her pen. A man from CNBS mouthed, "He's lost it." But Ethan didn't. He announced full reparations to the James estate, public access to the original technology, and Clara's name, not as a victim, but as a co-beneficiary of the new foundation in her father's name, the Walter James Institute for Ethical Innovation. Later that night, Clara sat across from Ethan at the old cafe they once called Neutral Ground. She didn't touch her tea. "You didn't have to do all that," she said. "I did," he replied, "because I can't undo what was done, but I can stop pretending none of it mattered." She nodded slowly, then reached into her bag, pulled out a letter. Not the one from her father, one she wrote herself hours before the lawsuit was filed. She slid it across the table. Open it." It read, "Dear Ethan, you broke my heart before you even knew it was yours to hold. But maybe the only way to rebuild trust is with broken pieces. Let's see what we can make of them." Outside, the candlelight from the cafe window flickered against the rain. 2 lavender flames. In Brooklyn. 1 in Manhattan, burning slowly. But no longer in silence. Mission 4. The Gala, the Ghost, and the Glass Slipper. The Gala was not Clara's idea. It was a board member's. A rebranding opportunity, they called it, to show the world Sinclair Corp has evolved. But to Clara, it felt like being dressed in silk and shoved into a glass house built by ghosts. She had spent her entire adult life avoiding ballrooms like this, rooms where women like her were invisible unless they carried silver trays or apology letters. Now she stood at the grand entrance of the Sinclair Legacy Gala, wearing her mother's sapphire pendant, a borrowed gown that clung too tightly, and a spine full of questions. The theme of the evening? Rebuilding with Grace. Clara almost laughed when she read it. Grace was never the currency in rooms like this. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers the size of minivans glittered like judgment. Cameras flashed, flutes clinked, and the scent of money was masked, poorly, by designer colognes and artificial vanilla. Clara's entrance was quiet, but not unnoticed. Whispers danced behind her back, like wind through tall grass. "Uh-huh," he asked. "The James girl. She sued them, and now she's here? Sinclair's pet project? Sinclair's redemption." She walked through them like a ghost returning to the house that buried her family. But then she saw him. Nothing on. Standing at the center of the marble floor, under a cascade of golden lights. No tux, no pretense, just a charcoal suit and a lavender pocket square. He looked exhausted, but grounded. Their eyes met. And for the first time in 10 years, the world fell quiet around them. "Clara," he said as she approached, "you came." "Still not sure why?" she replied, half smiling. "Because you're brave. Or curious. Or both." She tilted her head. "You always did know how to package pain into pretty sentences." He nodded. He deserved that. But before she could leave, he extended his hand, not to shake, but to offer a dance. A single dance. She hesitated. The room was watching. But then she remembered her father's words, scribbled in the margins of an old journal. Let them look. You were never meant to blend in with shadows. So she placed her hand in his. And just like that, the whisperers stopped. They danced in slow, aching silence. Not lovers. Not enemies. Nothing in between. I didn't recognize you at first, Ethan said softly. When I saw you again. We changed, Clara replied. No, we wear different masks, that's all. She looked up at him, eyes narrowed. And which one are you wearing now? He didn't blink. You won the day I let you walk out. The music shifted. So did the room. At the edge of the crowd stood a woman in gray. Mid-60s, elegant, sharp eyes. Margit Voss. Ethan's godmother, Sinclair matriarch by proxy and his mother's oldest confidant. She wasn't clapping. She wasn't smiling. And she was holding something. A black box. And when the music stopped, she stepped forward. Clara James, her voice echoed over the mic, brittle and poised. Clara turned. I believe this belongs to you, Margot said, placing the box between them. I found it in Margaret Sinclair's estate, hidden, sealed, labeled, only if she ever returns. Clara's hands trembled as she took it. She opened the box slowly. Inside was a single item. A glass slipper. But not the fairy tale kind. It was her mother's old perfume bottle, shaped like a slipper, shattered and glued back together with trembling hands. And beneath it, a folded photo. Her father. And Margaret Sinclair. Laughing. On a bench in Central Park. Not as enemies, but as something else. Something devastatingly tender. Ethan looked down. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear to you, Clara, I didn't know they were. Don't, she snapped, eyes glistening. Don't finish that sentence unless you're ready to admit your mother loved the man she destroyed. The room froze around them. No music, no glasses clinking, just raw, open air. Why would she do it? Clara's voice cracked. Why smile with him and then ruin him? I don't know, Ethan said. But I will find out. I owe you that. She shook her head. You owe it to him, and to yourself. Later that night, Clara slipped out the side door of the ballroom. The glass slipper box clutched tightly to her chest. She didn't look back. But she didn't leave angry. Not this time. Because now, she had a piece of the puzzle no one could take. A ghost. A photo. And a bottle that still smelled like lavender and regret. Back in the ballroom, Ethan stood alone. A journalist approached. Mr. Sinclair, any comment on the scene? Ethan glanced at the door Clara had just disappeared through. Then turned to the journalist with a weary smile. And she'd walked through fire to get here. And if we're lucky, she might light the way forward. Mission 5. The vault, the video, and the velvet box. Sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bathtub, the shattered glass slipper bottle beside her on the porcelain sink, like an echo from a fairy tale gone wrong. Her father's voice, his laugh, rang in her ears from that photo. His arm around Margaret Sinclair. The tenderness. And the betrayal. She lit one of her lavender candles, the last of her mother's old stock, and stared at the flame until dawn kissed the edge of her window. And then she called the only person who might still have answers. Mr. Bellamy, she whispered into the phone. You still have access to the Sinclair vault? A beat. Clara, are you sure you want to go there? No, she said honestly, but I think it's time we open the door. The Sinclair vault wasn't a metaphor. It was real. Tucked beneath the family's private estate on Long Island, a temperature-controlled archive of everything they never wanted the world to see. Legal papers, private journals, locked safes, destroyed drafts, and footage. So much footage. Clara hadn't stepped foot on Sinclair property since the lawsuit. But Ethan met her at the gate. He wore jeans and an old leather jacket, more like the boy she once kissed in a bookstore aisle than the CEO who signed million-dollar deals with a pen that had once belonged to Churchill. "You don't have to do this," he said. She met his gaze. "Yes, I do." The vault's steel door hissed open after a scan, 2 codes, and a thumbprint. The lights flickered on slowly, revealing shelves that stretched along the stone walls like a private museum of corporate power and buried guilt. It was cold, but Clara was colder. They walked in silence until Bellamy led them to section M Sinclair/sub 13. A row labeled Margaret, private, not to be touched. There, wedged between 2 1990s merger tapes, was a velvet box. Deep burgundy, laced with golden thread. Clara pulled it down gently. Her heart pounded like it was trying to claw its way out of her chest. Inside, a camcorder tape, marked only with a date, November 13th, 1997, the day before her father's final trial. The day Margaret Sinclair publicly severed all ties with James & Co. Ethan recognized the date too. His breath hitched. "Where's a projector in the back?" Bellamy said, somber. Clara clutched the box like a sacred relic. He followed Bellamy into the private viewing room. No windows, just a screen, 2 old velvet chairs, and 1,000 unspoken fears. The tape began with static. Then, a woman's voice, calm, British, familiar. "This is Margaret Sinclair," the recording began. "If you're seeing this, it means I failed, or chose cowardice, or was forced. Either way, someone deserves to know." The screen cleared. Margaret sat in her garden, early morning light casting shadows over her aged but elegant face. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just... "I loved him," she said plainly. "God help me, I loved Martin James, before the lawsuits, before the money poisoned everything. Before I knew what choosing him would cost me." Clara's breath stopped. Even Ethan turned pale. Margaret continued, "We gave me lavender, always lavender, said it reminded him of hope. I betrayed that hope, because I was told if I didn't, they'd destroy Ethan's inheritance. They'd dismantle everything. I chose bloodline over love." She paused. Tears shimmered in her eyes. "I ruined the man I loved to protect the boy I bore." The tape ended. Clara stared at the blank screen long after it faded. Everything inside her, rage, sorrow, vindication, swelled to a breaking point. All these years, she thought her father had been collateral in a power game. But the truth? He was sacrificed by someone who loved him. Ethan couldn't look at her. "Clara?" She stood, voice like ice. "You said your mother did it for legacy, but it was you. She did it for you." He flinched. "I didn't know." "Doesn't matter. My father still died believing he'd been abandoned, humiliated." "I can't undo it," Ethan whispered, "but I can help you finish what he started." She stared at him for a long, sharp second, and then handed him the velvet box. "You want to help me, Ethan? Then don't bury this. Don't spin it. Don't protect her memory. Show the world what really happened." 2 weeks later, Sinclair Corp held a press conference. It's not for another merger. Not to announce a quarterly surge. Not to play a video. A confession. A love story turned tragedy. A lavender-scented legacy. Clara watched it all unfold from the last row of the press room, alone, hands folded. Ethan stood at the podium, his voice clear, solemn. People inherit money, others inherit silence. Today, we choose to inherit truth. That night, a delivery arrived at Clara's apartment. A velvet box, not the same one. Inside, a single letter, handwritten, yellowed with time. Clara, if you're reading this, it means my cowardice found its way back to you. I failed your father, but I never stopped loving him, and I never stopped believing you'd grow into the woman he dreamed of. Forgive me. Or don't, but know this, he never stopped loving you. And neither did I. Or Margaret. Clara placed the note beside her lavender candle. She didn't cry. Not yet. But she whispered, softly, to the flickering flame, I was right. Lavender is hope. And for the first time she let herself believe she was not a daughter of shame, but a child born of something rare, something almost sacred. A love that should have changed the world. And now, it would. In Section 6, the nurse, the necklace, and the night he disappeared. Intrigue, emotional memory, and a turning point of legacy and loss. The rain started just after midnight. It tapped against the windows of Clara's brownstone like fingertips of the past. Waited to be let in. Outside, the city seemed hushed. Inside, she stood by her father's old desk, the lavender candle long since burned out. Only shadows and memories remained now. And then the doorbell rang. Not once. Twice. 3 deliberate chimes. She grabbed the old cashmere robe draped over the chair, her mother's, and cautiously opened the door. A woman stood there, mid-60s, soaked to the bone but elegant, composed. She held a small, wrapped box, and a look Clara recognized too well. The look of someone who's kept a secret far too long. Her name was Lorna Hayes. I was your father's private nurse in his final year, she said once inside, now drying her hands in Clara's kitchen. Her voice was low, smooth. He called me his last audience, because he never stopped telling stories. Clara leaned forward, her chest tightened. Why now? Why come to me after all these years? Lorna looked down at her hands. Because I saw the press conference, and because he made me promise to deliver something if the truth ever came out. She slid the box across the table. Clara hesitated, then unwrapped it. Inside, the necklace. Simple, elegant. Gold chain with a teardrop-shaped lavender stone. Clara's fingers trembled as she picked it up. I've seen this, she whispered. In pictures. He gave it to my mother. Lorna nodded. And he kept it. Even after she died. Said it reminded him that love, real love, leaves something behind. But that wasn't all. Folded beneath the velvet lining was a note. In her father's handwriting. She'll know when the time is right. And if she doesn't, the nurse will. Clara looked up, heart pounding. Lorna, what am I not seeing? And that's when the story began to unravel. One night, Lorna said, November 14, 1997, Martin James asked to be left alone in the penthouse for a few hours. He claimed he had documents to finish before the final deposition. But when she returned just before dawn, he was gone. Not just gone, vanished. No trace, no camera footage, no note. Only the necklace, left on his pillow. The police declared him missing for 72 hours. When he was found, he was lying unconscious in a burned-down storage house outside Queens. He claimed amnesia from smoke inhalation. Everyone believed it. Except Lorna. He wasn't confused when I found him, she said quietly. He was heartbroken, like he had chosen to walk away from everything, and then changed his mind. Clara's blood ran cold. What do you mean, chosen? Lorna exhaled slowly. I think someone asked him to disappear, to protect you. That night changed everything. The day after Martin was found, he dropped the case, walked away from the billion-dollar settlement, took a quiet plea deal for the world assumed guilt. But what if it wasn't guilt? What if it was protection? Clara's hands were shaking now. She rose, pacing the kitchen. He left the necklace like it was a goodbye. Lorna nodded. And when I asked him, he said, I had to vanish to protect the only thing I had left of her. Clara froze. You, Lorna said gently. He meant you. Later that night, Clara stared out at the city skyline, the necklace clasped around her neck. A small part of her had always believed her father had given up. But what if he hadn't? What if he had sacrificed everything to protect her from something? But from what? The answer came from the past, in form of a storage receipt. Tucked inside the box, just traced to Olivia's suite. Olivia is 1997. Under the alias M. Hartley, her father's mother's maiden name. Clara's pulse quickened. She remembered that place. It was a run-down Catholic medical shelter where her mother once volunteered. A place Clara hadn't visited in 25 years. The next morning, she went. St. Helena's had long since closed. Now it was a dusty hall rented out to artists and nonprofits. But the basement? Still locked. Still bearing the same rusted red cross on the iron gate. She bribed the caretaker for access. Inside, rows of sealed cabinets, old medical files, and filing drawers labeled. But then she found it. A drawer marked 1997/neonatal/JF. Clara pulled it open and froze. Inside, a file labeled Infant Charlotte F. James. She blinked, then pulled the file out. Her stomach dropped. The file wasn't about her. It was about a twin, born premature, transferred for emergency care. The record ended there. No adoption, no death certificate, just gone. Clara staggered back, heart in her throat. Her mother never told her. Her father kept it hidden. All these years she'd mourned the loss of her father. But now, was she missing a sister? She raced out of the orphan wing as if the walls themselves were caving in. One phrase from the medical notes burned into her mind. Infant transported under donor identity S.L. Hargrove for private adoption. Clara knew that name. Her mother once whispered it in a dreamlike voice years ago. She looked like lavender and light, just like my little Sienna. Sienna, her lost twin? That night, Clara returned home to find an envelope slipped under her door. No return address. Inside, a photo. 2 baby girls, side by side, wrapped in the same lavender blankets. And a note. Only one of you was meant to survive, but the world is cruel to those who shine too bright. Clara's knees buckled. Suddenly, everything was shifting. The trial. The video. The vault. The necklace. It wasn't just about justice. From the truth of who she really was. And somewhere out there, Jenna was still alive. And someone had gone to great lengths to keep them apart. In Session 7, the twin, the tycoon, and the truth they buried. Revelation, reunion, and the dark hands behind the legacy. The storm outside Clara's window had turned biblical. Thunder cracked like bone in the distance, as if the sky itself were groaning beneath the weight of truths too long buried. She couldn't sleep. Not after what she had found. The twin. Jenna? A name that sounded like home, a memory she never knew she had. Clara had replayed the photo 1,000 times in her mind. The 2 infants, nestled in matching lavender blankets, their features nearly identical. The handwriting on the back chilled her. Only one was meant to survive. Why would anyone want to erase her sister? And more importantly, who? The next morning, Clara made her way to an address she'd found scribbled on the inside flap of the orphan file. S.L. Hargrove Holdings, Upper East Side, 72nd and Madison. It was a limestone building tucked behind a marble columned facade, elegant and cold like the men who ruled Wall Street in its golden age. A private investment firm. But Clara wasn't here for stocks. She was here for blood. At the front desk, she hesitated. I'm looking for information on a woman named Sienna Hargrove. She may have been adopted through your founder's estate. Back in 1997, the receptionist narrowed her eyes. I'm sorry, but our client records are private. Clara didn't flinch. She removed her necklace, the lavender teardrop glinting in the morning light, and laid it gently on the marble counter. "Then tell him," she said, "the daughter of Martin James is here, and I want to know why his child was sold." 10 minutes later, Clara found herself in the penthouse office of Garrett Hargrove, founder of the firm. A tycoon in every sense, trim suit, icy gaze, the type of man who killed dreams with handshakes. He studied her like a chessboard. "So you found the file," he said calmly, swirling scotch at 10 a.m. "I wondered how long it would take." "You knew," Clara said, trembling. "You knew she existed. Why hide her? Why erase her from the records?" Garrett took a slow sip. "Because your mother was dying, your father was desperate, and my wife had just lost her second child. It was an elegant solution to a tragedy. One girl went home with your father, the other gave my wife a reason to live." Clara's jaw clenched. "You stole her." He raised a brow. "No, Miss James, we bought her." But the silence was brutal. Garrett set down his glass. "Your father made a devil's bargain. He was days away from being destroyed by the people he thought were allies. He came to me, begged me to save one of his girls in case things went wrong. I offered to save both, for a price." What was the price?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "His silence," Garrett said, "and a signature on a deal that let my conglomerate swallow his." The candle in Clara's chest, the last flicker of faith in her father, dimmed. But then Garrett said something she didn't expect. "We came back, 10 years later, asking to meet her." Clara's breath caught. "What happened?" Garrett looked away. "I told him she didn't remember him, that she was happy. He laughed, broken." Back in her brownstone, Clara stared at the necklace again. Had her father tried to reunite them? Had he fought? Had he sacrificed everything so at least one of them could grow up safe? She thought about Sienna, raised as a Hargrove, wealthy, protected, but lied to, just like her. Clara dug deeper. She called former nannies, employees, anyone who had worked at the Hargrove estate. Most refused to speak. Until one name popped up again and again. Mara Langston, the woman who raised Sienna from infancy, fired abruptly 5 years ago. Clara tracked her to a quiet neighborhood in Brooklyn. Mara opened the door with cautious eyes, but when Clara said, "I think I'm her sister," the woman burst into tears. "I always knew," Mara whispered. "You look just like her." Eva showed her the photo. Amara touched it like scripture. She never knew she was adopted. They told her the scars from her oxygen tubes were from a childhood accident. But when she was 15, she started asking questions. Clara leaned forward. And Mara hesitated. "They sent her away." "Where?" "Switzerland. A clinic. Said it was for her emotional adjustment. When she came back, she was different. Quiet, obedient, like someone had erased her fire." Clara's stomach twisted. "What's her name now?" Mara swallowed. "They changed it legally at 16. Clara waited. Sylvia Hargrove. Clara found her online the next day. Sylvia S. Hargrove, 27, silent investor in several biotech firms, known for her philanthropy in children's health, rarely photographed, unmarried, no social media. But there was a gala. That weekend. The Hargrove Legacy Foundation Ball. And Sylvia, Sienna, was the keynote speaker. Clara stood outside the grand ballroom that night in a long black gown, her mother's necklace resting on her collarbone like armor. She didn't belong in this world, but she was ready to tear it down. Inside, chandeliers glittered over polished marble floors. The Hargroves were everywhere. Old money, empty smiles, and somewhere in the middle of it, standing under a massive portrait of Garrett Hargrove, was a woman with soft waves of dark hair, a lilac satin dress, and eyes like Clara's. And I took the podium. Clara's heart pounded as she began her speech, composed, charitable, rehearsed. But halfway through, Clara stepped forward, and the candle in her chest roared back to life. She reached into her clutch and took out the photo. She handed it to the security guard, to the woman on stage. I paused, then nodded. Clara stepped back into the shadows. Sienna paused mid-sentence as the photo was placed on the podium. She glanced at it, then froze. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then her voice cracked, and she whispered into the microphone, "I need a moment." She ran off stage, past cameras, past confusion, straight into the hall, and straight into Clara. Their eyes locked, time bent. Neither said a word, and then Fonda. Geneva fell into Clara's arms and whispered, "I used to dream about you." In the silence, the Hargrove empire trembled, because somewhere behind the velvet curtains and champagne toasts, two sisters had just broken the lie that held their world together. Mission 8. The betrayal, the baby, and the boardroom war. Secrets unravel, a child is revealed, and a billion-dollar empire stands on the edge of collapse. It was a Tuesday when the world stopped turning. Not for everyone, just for the people sitting at the polished mahogany table inside Hargrove Global's executive boardroom. 12 men in tailored suits, 2 sisters in mourning black, and one photograph that shouldn't exist. The photo lay in the center of the table like a loaded weapon. 2 newborn girls wrapped in lavender blankets, time-stamped and signed in the margins. One marked Clara, the other Sienna. But the headline wasn't the twin revelation. It was the post-it note attached to the back, now projected on the big screen. One child sold, one child saved, both now dangerous. Garrett Hargrove was not present. He was in a private hospital in Geneva, suffering from what the press politely referred to as a stress cardiac episode. But Clara and Sienna, united for the first time in 2 decades, were very present. And so was their plan. Clara spoke first. "I am here to formally contest Garrett Hargrove's leadership of this firm," she said, voice steady. "On behalf of the biological daughters of Martin James, whose company Garrett illegally acquired after coercing him to surrender custody of one child in a backdoor adoption." Gasps. Whispers. A ripple of disbelief. Sienna stood beside her, cool, regal, devastatingly composed. "As Sylvia Hargrove," she said, using the name they'd given her for the final time, "I am resigning from all trust-held positions and revoking my silent board proxy, effective immediately." That proxy had given Garrett his majority. Now, he didn't have it. 2 hours later, the market heard the tremor. Hargrove Global's shares dropped 6 points. News outlets ran headlines like wildfire. Hargrove Harris withdraws support amid allegations of twin scandal and corporate coercion. My lavender legacy, twins reunited, empire in crisis. But the real shockwave came from a single press release issued by Clara James Holdings, a dormant shell company created by her father before his death, reactivated just that morning. Effective immediately, CJH is initiating a legal claim for damages and restitution totaling $1,100,000,000, 0 cents, citing wrongful acquisition, defamation, and human trafficking. And then, one final sentence. "We do this not for revenge, but for redemption." That night, Clara sat on the floor of her apartment, barefoot, her phone buzzing non-stop. Lawyers, reporters, investors, strangers offering interviews, threats, or praise. But she tuned it all out when she noticed Sienna, curled up on the couch, clutching something tightly in her arms. A baby blanket. Of lavender? Clara knelt beside her. "Is that?" Sienna nodded, eyes rimmed red. "I kept it hidden, all these years. I didn't know why, I couldn't let go of it." Clara reached out and touched the fabric. Faint scent of rosewater, faded edges. "You remembered," Clara whispered. Sienna shook her head. "No, I felt, somewhere deep down, I knew I had another half." Then she reached for something else. a folded envelope. Clara recognized the handwriting instantly. Art and James, their father. The letter was postmarked 2011. Whichever of you finds this first, I'm sorry. I tried to fix what I broke. I was a coward, a grieving widower drowning in fear. I thought giving one of you a better life would protect you both, but instead, I gave the devil our name. If you ever reunite, don't fight for the company, fight for the child. Clara looked up. The child? Sienna slowly turned her phone around and showed Clara a picture. A little girl, 3 years old. Dark curls, hazel eyes, holding a lavender teddy bear. It's mine, Sienna said quietly. And his. Clara blinked. Whose? And I hesitated, and then whispered, Nathaniel Greer? It was like being hit by a truck. Nathaniel Greer, Garrett Hargrove's protege, COO of Hargrove Global, the man being groomed to take over the empire, and the man who, 5 years ago, had vanished from the tabloids after a public falling out with Garrett. We were engaged, Sienna said, but when I told him about the baby, Garrett intervened, claiming I was emotionally unstable, sent Nathaniel away. I haven't seen him since. Clara felt rage build in her throat. Your daughter is the heir to both bloodlines. Sienna nodded. And Garrett knows. By dawn, Clara had made a decision. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about protecting a child. Their legacy. Their bloodline. Their second chance. 2 days later, the war began. Clara and Sienna walked into the Hargrove boardroom again, this time with an army of attorneys, a forensic accountant, and a closed envelope marked DNA proof of lineage and custody rights. Garrett Hargrove, now stable but still seated in a wheelchair, watched them like ghosts from a past he tried to erase. But it was Nathaniel Greer who silenced the room. He strode in through the back doors, eyes blazing, and no lawyers, no press, just truth. I am the father, he said clearly, and I will no longer be silenced. He walked to Sienna and handed her the little girl. The child, Lena, looked up at her mother and whispered, Mama? And in that single word, the empire cracked. The final blow came during the vote. 11 board members. 1 abstained. 6 voted to retain Garrett. 4 voted to remove him. And then came the swing vote. Daniel. He looked Garrett in the eye, then looked at Sienna, at Lena, and said, I vote to remove. Garrett Hargrove was escorted out of the company he built on secrets. Clara and Sienna didn't celebrate. They just held each other, and the little girl between them. Because this wasn't victory. It was restoration. Mission 9. The will, the wound, and the woman in the mirror. Hidden will. An old wound reopened, and a woman finally faces the truth about who she's become, and who she still wants to be. There are moments in a woman's life when the mirror becomes an enemy. Not because of age. Not even because of shame. But because it finally reflects the truth. Clara James stood in the guest bathroom of the Greer estate, the one Nathaniel had offered them as temporary shelter during the media chaos, and stared at her reflection. She barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because of her tousled hair or the fatigue lining her face, but because, for the first time, she wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. Power had always been the pursuit. Justice, the excuse. But now? Now, there was a child asleep in the next room. A sister whose smile no longer trembled. And a man who looked at her like she wasn't made of armor. The will arrived by courier at 8:03 AUN. Not Garrett's. Art and James's. Their father. A sealed document, unread for over 20 years. Marked confidential and held in trust by an obscure law firm in Vermont. Clara and Sienna opened it together. Nathaniel stayed in the background, watching, hands folded in front of him. The letterhead was faded, but the language was clear. In the event that both my daughters are reunited and the truth of their separation is brought into the light, I hereby designate the following inheritance conditions. What followed wasn't financial. It was emotional warfare. Clara would inherit full ownership of the Vermont farmhouse where they were born, on the condition she never sells it for profit. Senna, upon public acknowledgement of her true lineage, would inherit James Artisan Labs, a small but still operational fragrance company their mother once founded in Brooklyn. And lastly, if the girls reconciled and agreed to work together for 1 year, a dormant charitable foundation called Lavender Rise would be transferred to their joint control, including a $10 million 0-cent endowment set aside for healing women whose choices were taken from them. The air between them froze. Clara exhaled first. He knew. Sienna nodded slowly. He knew what Gar would do, and he tried to give us a way out. But the will came with something else. An envelope marked simply, "The one I wounded most." It was addressed to Clara. Inside, one single page. My pride made me cruel, my fear made me weak, but it was my silence that made me a stranger to you. Clara, my brilliant, stubborn child, if you are reading this, then the world has broken open, and I pray you will find a way to forgive me, not for leaving you behind, but for making you believe you had to win to be. She dropped the letter. Sienna caught her before she crumpled to the floor. Later that night, Clara sat alone in the garden outside. The sky hung low, stars blurred by fog, the scent of late-blooming jasmine rising from the ground. Nathaniel joined her, wordless. They sat for a long while in silence, until she finally said, "I thought justice would feel like thunder, like some kind of storm breaking." He looked at her. "And does it feels like breath, like I can finally exhale." Then she turned to him. "I spent so long trying to be the woman who could fight him. Now, I don't know who I am without that battle." Nathaniel reached into his pocket, pulled out something wrapped in silk. He handed it to her gently. A mirror compact. It felt more vintage. On the back was a monogram. M. Your mother's, he said. "I found it in Garrett's vault, the day you exposed him." Clara opened it. The mirror had a crack, just off-center. Her face reflected in two halves. Straw and soft. She closed it slowly. "You see her?" Nathaniel asked. "The woman you used to be, before all this." Clara swallowed. "No, but for the first time I think I'd like to meet her again." The next day, the sisters went to Brooklyn, to James Artisan Labs. The building was old, brick-laced, almost swallowed by surrounding warehouses. Inside, it smelled like history and lavender oil. Sienna stood frozen in the doorway. "I remember this," she whispered. "I don't know how, but I do. There was music, laughter." Clara reached into her coat and pulled out the old lavender candle. The one that had been lit the night she found their father's name scratched off the birth certificate. She lit it again, set it on the old front desk. And for a moment, the scent filled the space, like time itself bending. That evening, Clara found herself in the basement. Boxes, binders, fragments of a life paused mid-sentence. She found a journal. To mother's. The final entry read, "It happened to me tell them I loved them, that I never wanted them separated, that even in silence, I fought for them in every breath I took." Clara didn't cry. Not then. Not until she looked in the mirror hanging near the stairwell, old, and finally saw her mother's eyes in her own. Not sharp like before, but whole. Section 10. The Lavender Rise, the Last Forgiveness, and the Legacy They Chose. In the ashes of betrayal, a new dawn rises, not with revenge, but with a lavender-scented legacy of healing, redemption, and the love they almost lost. The day began with rain. Soft, cleansing. The kind that didn't drown things, just made them new. Clara James stood on the steps of the newly restored James Artisan Labs, now adorned with a brushed bronze sign that read, "You'll Rise Foundation, For women reclaiming their voices. Sienna stood beside her. No bodyguards, no media swarm, just them, two women who once didn't know they were sisters. Now they were everything each other had left. The building behind them wasn't just a lab anymore. It was a sanctuary. And today, it opened its doors. Inside, women from every borough came to see what the fuss was about. Some wore designer coats. Others came in borrowed clothes. A few carried their children. All of them carried their pain. Clara greeted them, not as a CEO, not as a fighter, but as a woman who finally understood that some wars weren't meant to be won, only survived. At noon, they gathered in the atrium, once filled with the scents of perfume oils, now filled with the hum of hope. Sienna stepped up first. Before I knew Clara was my sister, I only knew her as the woman who stood up for girls like me, girls who were told they were mistakes, who were used, discarded to Sigorton. Today we say, no more. Applause rippled. Then Clara took the mic. "There's no donation box here," she said. "You don't owe us anything. You don't need to explain what happened to you. Just know this. This place was built on the ashes of secrets, but it lives on in your truth." She paused, then reached into her pocket, pulled out a lavender candle, lit it, and placed it in the center of the room. A hush fell over the crowd. "I light this," she whispered, "for every woman who was told to stay quiet, who thought she had to become steel to survive. You don't. You never did." That night, the crowd thinned. But one man remained. Nathaniel Greer. Clara found him in the back garden, near the koi pond, holding something in his hand. It was the velvet box, the one he'd retrieved from Garrett's private vault, but hadn't dared open. "I think it's time," he said quietly. Clara nodded. He opened it slowly. Inside wasn't jewelry. It was a photograph of Nathaniel as a boy, with a woman they'd both seen only once, at a funeral neither of them could forget. His mother. And hers too. A letter was tucked inside the box. Handwritten. Delicate. "My sons. Yes, both of you." Clara's breath caught. "I chose to hide the truth not to protect myself, but to protect the child I was forced to leave behind. Nathaniel, I am sorry I couldn't raise you. And to Garrett, I am sorry I let your father's legacy shape the man you became. One of you will build, one of you will destroy. I only pray love will decide which." Nathaniel folded the letter, tears in his eyes. "I spent my whole life trying to prove I wasn't like him," he said. "You're not," Clara whispered. He looked at her. "I was scared I'd love you like he loved my mother, obsessively, possessively, dangerously, so I pushed you away." Clara shook her head. "You loved me the only way you knew how, but now we know better." I took her hand. "The first time," he said, "I want to choose a life I'm not afraid of." Weeks passed. The media storm quieted. Garrett James was indicted on 7 counts, corporate sabotage, conspiracy. But Clara declined to press further civil charges. "I don't want another courtroom," she told the press. "I want a world where women don't have to beg to be believed." The Lavender Rise Foundation gained traction and flew in from across the country to volunteer, to share, to heal. And one afternoon, while filing documents, Sienna found something curious in their mother's journal. A pressed flower. Lavender. And beneath it, a name written in cursive. Evelyn. Clara stared at it. "Her name," Sienna said. Clara replied, "But maybe the name she wanted us to remember her by. Evelyn James. A woman silent by history. Now reborn through every woman who walked through their doors." Spring came early that year. The grand reopening of the Vermont farmhouse, now a retreat center for survivors and their families, was set for April 15. On opening day, Clara stood by the old swing set. The same one she remembered from childhood dreams she used to dismiss as fantasy. Only now, they were memories. Sienna joined her, carrying a frame. It was the mirror compact, the one with their mother's initials. Restored, unbroken. They hung it in the farmhouse foyer, so every woman who entered would see her reflection. Not cracked, not divided, just whole. That night, under a sky full of stars, Clara and Nathaniel sat on the porch. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a new velvet box. Smaller, lighter. She laughed softly. You just can't resist boxes, can you? He opened it. The ring. Simple, elegant. The center was a small lavender gem amethyst. And more secrets, he said. Your revenge, she replied. He smiled. Us. She nodded. Just us. He slipped the ring onto her finger. And for the first time since she was a girl clutching an unlabeled candle, Clara James felt something bloom inside her that had long been buried. Beast, the lavender rise. In the end, the lavender rise wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about tearing down the man who broke her. It was about building something stronger out of the very pain he caused. Clara James chose healing over hate. But she could have buried Garrett James in lawsuits. But instead, she chose to lift other women from the shadows. She chose legacy over war. She reclaimed her power not by screaming louder, but by lighting a single candle and saying, "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep going. Your story isn't over. Even in betrayal, you can rewrite the ending." Sisterhood heals. Sometimes family isn't by blood, but by shared survival. Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's who you choose to rise with. Real love doesn't rescue you, it stands beside you as you rescue yourself. To you, the woman watching this, if you've ever been silenced, dismissed, overlooked, if you've ever loved someone who forgot your worth, let this story remind you, you are not too broken to begin again. You are not too old to be chosen. And you are never too far gone to light someone else's path. Comment below. What part of Clara's story spoke to your soul? Like if you believe in second chances. Share this story with a sister, a daughter, a friend, someone who needs to know they're not alone. Subscribe for more true stories of redemption, power, and love that defies the odds. Together, let's turn pain into purpose and legacy into light.